Yay! What is up?
Told you I was ready.
I was like, Kim, you ready? She's like, I'm ready. Are you ready? Welcome, everyone, to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 261.
We are up there.
We are up there. I'm actually really
I'm also like typing like...
Tonight, for some reason,
like
feels like it's our first time doing any of this. I'm really excited about tonight's episode. Kim and I have been talking about getting our guest on tonight for the last couple of weeks. He's been going through an injury. We're going to talk about that injury on tonight's show, but also being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, because he has seemingly managed to push through what was going to be a multi-month type of injury, the one that would just take him out of racing and training for multiple months. But he has managed to push through, and I want to find out his magic recipe, what he did to get to where he is as of like this weekend, running long miles again and amping up his training for some potential races this year. Maybe we'll find out. But Dylan Bowman is going to be joining us on the show tonight. The perpetuator of Stoke, as people refer to him as. I refer to him as just a really good friend.
Yeah.
I look up to this guy so much. I get so excited whenever I get a chance to talk to him because I'm like, Dylan is like my idol on a pedestal.
I refer to him as a great runner who I also followed their dogs on Instagram.
Yeah, let's be honest. Our guest Dylan is amazing. Their two dogs are more amazing. So welcome everyone to Ginger Runner Live. The show begins now. Ginger Runner. Yay! What is up, everybody? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 261. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy Mondays to spend a little bit of it with us. I am your host, Ethan Newberry.
Hi, Ethan.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thanks. It feels good to be here.
Yeah, welcome to my show.
Who are you?
Why is this a weird Monday? I don't know what's going on.
I don't know. I'm baking bread.
You are baking bread.
You're in the midst of making dinner. I was up late editing last night. It's 1,000 degrees in here. Our dog is actually sleeping for the first time.
Now.
So things feel a little like, whoa, we should be on edge. But we're not. Who are you?
I'm Kim.
Okay, great.
What's up, you guys? My name is Kim. And as always, I'll be manning the chat room. We are live. We have our wonderful guest, Dylan, here with us. If you guys have questions for Dylan, please pop them into the chat room. There's already questions rolling in.
Good. Dylan is one of our favorite people on the planet. He's a fantastic ultra runner, has really paved the way for ultra runners by not only being an incredible athlete, but just being a good steward of the sport, really approachable, one of the kindest and nicest athletes in the sport. And that's what really draws us to Dylan. I'm just a huge Dylan Bowman fan. He is referred to often as the perpetuator of Stoke, and that is nothing but the truth. If you ever get a chance to meet the man, he just exudes this real positive energy and excitement. You can't help but just want to root for him and be a big fan of this guy. So it's exciting to have him on the show tonight. It's been over a year. That's what I figured out today. And over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about getting Dylan back on the show. And I look back through the previous episodes. I was like, we had to have had him on recently because I feel like I just have this kind of Dylan high all the time. And I mean, we did
recently see Dylan in person.
We did, and he was at Tiger Claw, and we'll talk about that during the show, of course. But we had him on over a year ago, just after he set the fastest known time on the Lost Coast Trail, which is a really incredible experience. And we'll talk to him a little bit about what has happened since then, because a lot has gone down.
Yes.
Before we introduce our incredible guest, we of course have some individuals that we'd like to thank on this show for allowing it to happen, and that is our incredible Patreon crew, those who support us on Patreon. Patreon.com/thegingerrunner. For as little as $1 a month, you get to support everything we do here, from live shows, reviews, films. The video that I posted late last night in a post-weekend stupor, which is kind of a fun video where I summited a local mountain called Bandera, which has some nasty vert. But beside the point, big thank you to our Patreon supporters. 3 individuals in particular at that top tier. Chris Lee out of Hong Kong and his organization Trailblazer. They do incredible amount of work to showcase the trails just there in the Hong Kong community. If you find yourself in the area, reach out to Chris or Trailblazer. They'll hook you up with the best knowledge and know-how for the local terrain. Rick Bjarnason and his team at cheekymonkeymedia.ca. They are a web design company, and they completely redid the gingerrunner.com website a couple of months ago, and it's fantastic. It's super easy to use for me as someone who hates updating websites. They made it incredibly easy. Rick himself is an ultra runner and training for some really big races this summer. We've had him on the show before, and it's just awesome to watch his training and watch him get ready to crush it this summer, especially with the heat turning up now too.
Yes.
And finally, Brian Sands, good friend of ours who's been a longtime supporter. Brian is on this incredible journey with his running, lost over 100 pounds, ran his first marathon, 50K, now training for his first 50 miler. He'll actually be in town this coming weekend.
We'll see Brian in a couple days. He'll be up here racing.
It'll be pretty cool.
Also somebody that is coming back from injury.
Yes. So. He himself is learning the same lesson that we're going to be talking about on the show tonight. So a big thank you to Brian, Chris, and Rick for all of their support.
Yes.
Without further ado, let's bring on our incredible guest. As we mentioned in the pre-show and just a couple of seconds ago, he is recently coming back from injury. I want to find a little bit more about that and some of the history since we've last had him on the show. So without further ado, let me welcome Dylan Bowman.
Yay!
What's up, man?
Hey, guys. Thanks so much. What a lovely introduction. I can't believe it's been 260 plus episodes.
We did the math. I think we do the math almost at every episode. And it's like 5 years. 5 years. What?
Yeah,
it's crazy.
5 years. I think this is my 4th or 5th time, so once a year seems about right. So
if we could do it every month, let's be honest, that's how we would do it. If we could do it. How are the dogs?
I appreciate you guys having me. The dogs are great. Yeah,
okay.
they're sleeping somewhere right now, so I'm afraid to bother them because they may interrupt our conversation here.
I hate to say it, but we only bring you on the show for the dogs. So if at any point you need to wake them up, we would not be mad. I'm just kidding.
Maybe near the end we can go grab them.
Yeah. Great. It's going to turn into that show where everyone's like, I can't wait for the dogs. Well, dude, I mean, again, it's great to have you on the show. I can't say enough good things about you. And I know sometimes that's hard for people to sort of hear, is just sort of adoration like what I have for you. I really enjoy what you do for this sport, because not only are you at the top tier of the athletic portion of the sport, but you also make it really easy for those of us who are not at that tier to approach you, to approach the sport itself, to approach new challenges. And I think that's a real unique characteristic. So I appreciate all you do, man, especially during times like what you've just gone through, where despite having injury and being down for the count, you are still contributing to the sport.
Well, yeah, thanks so much. And obviously the sport means a lot to me. I mean, it's given me so much. It's given me many of my closest friends who I've met through trail and ultra running. It's given me my job and my livelihood. And so, for me, I enjoy nothing more than to, sit around and BS about the sport as much as I do, competing and training and all those things. And I think we've all of us who've, been around the sport for a long time understand how special it is and how unique it is, a sport. And so, I think it is important to just sort of carry that ethos with you as a representative of the sport, and to just always be, a good steward and a good ambassador and, a welcoming individual. And so that's how I try and live. And again, yeah, I mean, I just love it, and it's given me so much. So just try and, enjoy it while I can.
No doubt. And I know that we'll get to the most recent injury, but you're no stranger to injury. I know that we've had you on the show years ago, right around the time that you had a pretty severe ankle sprain, which took you out for a while. And I was undergoing my very similar injury, and I needed to hear from you, like, what do I need to do to heal this and get back to the running and get back to the sport? That was a couple of years ago. How has this most recent injury affected you? Has it been worse? Has it been the same? Was it just like repeating the same old steps and stepping away and stepping back, or have you taken a new approach with this most recent injury?
Well, it's a complicated question, and I'll try and unpack it in a simple way. But I've actually been very fortunate in my career, dating back to when I've been a kid in my athletic career, in how few injuries I've actually encountered and had to confront. In fact, I mean, thinking back, I can't remember ever missing a game. I can't even remember ever like missing a practice growing up playing team sports and playing lacrosse through high school and college. And I mean, I've always just been so lucky with my health. And really, the two injuries I've dealt with in my athletic career have been my right and my left ankle. My right ankle I did in 2013, just before UTMB. So it was August of 2013, kept me
Right.
out of the race there. And that was really my first encounter with serious acute injury. And, you know, obviously I learned a lot from that, which we went over in that episode that you were talking about a couple of years ago when I was on and you were dealing with a similar thing. Um, but yeah, now this time I've done something very similar to my left ankle. And I feel like I have matured a lot and am approaching it in a different way, in a wiser way, than I did the injury in 2013. And that has helped me to sort of bounce back a little bit quicker, actually a lot quicker than I did in 2013. So, you know, I have been really lucky. Of course, we all know that going through this type of stuff is not easy. So when I hit the dark moments, I do reflect on the fact that I did, you know, never miss a game, never miss a practice when I was a kid. And, you know, everybody hits these sort of rough patches and, you know, you just have to focus on doing what you can to get better as quickly as you can. So that's what I've been trying to do these last couple months.
I know that we'll start to, as you mentioned, sort of unpack this most recent experience for you, the last 8 weeks specifically, in this episode. But I do want to back up further. So we had you on the show about a year ago, right after the Lost Coast FKT. I was really fortunate to be present and witness that and see this. I mean, it felt like you were on the rise for that year. Like you were rocking on all cylinders. Everything was firing. The legs felt good. I remember you talking about just how good you felt and how much harder you probably could have pushed, but you were just wanting to enjoy the day with friends and that sort of thing. How did the last year sort of play out for you? Did you race to your full potential? Did things get in the way? Was life giving you speed bumps? How did it all sort of play out since we last saw you?
Yeah, another great question and a loaded question that I'll try and answer without spending 15 minutes just pontificating here. But
We'll get more specific.
yes,
You can be as general or as specific as you want.
right. Well, last year was great. I mean, almost everything about it was just, yeah, almost couldn't have drawn it up any better. I started the year last year going to Tarawera, which was a race I had done before, and I won it again for the second time. Shortly after that, as you said, we did the Lost Coast. Shortly after that, I won the Ultra Trail Mount Fuji and the best race of my career and one of the most dramatic 100-mile races I can ever remember happening as a follower and fan of the sport. And then in August, I went and had an almost equally as dramatic race and equally satisfying race at TDS, where I finished second, and another incredibly close race. And so as a whole, that was, I think, one of my best seasons ever as an ultra runner. And, you know, after 8 or 9 years of doing it, it's super satisfying to still feel like you're improving and you've still got a lot left in the tank. Of course, the North Face 50 was canceled in November, which I was also planning to do to sort of finish the season. But looking back, it was shortly after TDS that I sort of started to, you know, confront some issues, and mostly I can pinpoint it to that just in a couple of different ways. Number one, like that race, I absolutely had to destroy myself to get the result that I did. I don't want to go into the whole situation because it's an even longer story, but
That's okay.
I was absolutely shattered after that race and immediately got on a transatlantic flight the next morning to get back to the East Coast of the US to go to a good friend's wedding, where, of course, I spent a couple of days drinking and dancing and celebrating and generally not recovering in an intelligent way.
It's it's funny because I remember even talking with you about this, like seeing the pictures of TDS and like, oh my God, what a race, the race of a lifetime, like pushing your body. And then seeing the pictures of the wedding, and both Kim and I kind of went, how did he get
Is he there already?
How did he get there? It was like you were in France, and then 2 seconds later you were at a wedding. That was crazy.
And it was a really fun experience and something I don't regret. We had a good group of our old friends from Marin who all sort of did it together. The UTMB to wedding experience was really, really special, but it left me in an even deeper hole. And then immediately after that, I had to fly to Japan for a thing with the North Face that I was doing out there around the Ultra Trail Mount Fuji. And all awesome, cool experiences, right? But I got home from Japan after being on my third continent in like 5 weeks, having not recovered from a 120-kilometer race. And I was just physically, emotionally, absolutely wrecked, you know? And I felt like I wasn't able to recover from that through the entire winter. No. And I think even more than the physical exhaustion, I was dealing with like a little bit of like emotional angst too. You know, as you guys know, my wife Harmony and I moved back to Colorado last summer, and it was so great. Like we sort of treated it as summer vacation. You know, she was figuring out what she wanted to do next with her career while she was enjoying, you know, the summer in the mountains and a little bit of a sabbatical. And we both sort of like got back in the fall thinking we would have had like our life figured out at that point. And so like, what's next? What's she going to do? Where are we going to make our home, etc.
Right.
And we sort of arrived, back and, you know, nothing was figured out, even though we had, you know, the summer of our lives. And for me, that's just like an unsettling feeling, you know, just not feeling like I know which direction I'm headed. Yeah. And I think that's why I've always loved sport, is like I can pinpoint what, you know, where I'm headed, and then I can do everything in my power to get myself to that position in an intelligent and strategic way. And yeah, and so I've had a hard time embracing that unsettled feeling, and I think that's sort of impacted my health and my training since then. And so to just sort of bring it full circle, I mean, I got sick a number of times over the winter, which is really unusual for me. Like I had gone years without even getting a cold. And I got sick before the Hong Kong 100K, which was a race that I traveled to. That was totally ruined. I got sick right before a ski mountaineering race here in Colorado. And yeah, I've just generally just not been feeling like myself, right? And so then when to finally answer your question, I was getting ready for Transwilcania in May, and to get out of the snow here in Colorado, I decided to go out to Portland to stay with my in-laws, Harmony's folks, to train for a little bit because we had just a crazy deep snow winter here. And on my first run, when I got to Oregon, I broke my ankle. And so for me, it was just like, you know, feeling like when it rains, it pours, you know, just like felt like I haven't been able to catch a break in ages. But, you know, don't want to be too overly dramatic about it. And now, you know, I felt like it's given me the opportunity to address that other sort of internal turmoil and get myself back to being myself, you know. So that's sort of the long story of what the last like 8 or 10 months has looked like for me.
Well, I appreciate that. That's our show. Thank you. I mean, I love that you are able to talk about it, or even at least be able to reflect on it, because it's so often we talk on this show or, you know, any podcast or any of that sort of thing where we're talking about injuries and like coming back from injuries and stuff like that. So often it's not addressed some of the deeper reasons that these injuries can happen. Life stresses, whether it's relocation stresses or path stresses. And we never get a chance to really talk about that side of things, especially at the elite level too. Like it's so easy to say, oh, well, I got X injury and it kept me from the sport for X number of weeks or months. And then I'm back at the sport and now I'm, you know, crushing again. It's more difficult for people to sort of open up with things that might just happen in their everyday life. Do you think would you do anything different from your experience last year, or do you feel it put you where you needed to be and has sort of helped guide you in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely take the steps that I've taken more recently a lot quicker in terms
Mm,
of coming back to terms with like why I've been feeling so unsettled and so just generally um, out of sync with the universe. Just things have not just been clicking for me. And looking back to last year when everything was clicking, it was I think we overlook a lot of times as in sport and as athletes how important having that steady personal life is in having the good performances too,
yeah.
like last year, I wasn't necessarily, I actually ran fewer miles last year than I have since I've been tracking my training. And I had probably my best season ever. So there's clearly a relationship between training and your performances, but I think there's an equally powerful relationship between like your internal environment and how content you are
Right.
and those performances as well. Right. And so, when everything was clicking last year, my racing just came second nature. My training
Mhm.
just felt easy, right? And then when you don't have that anymore, then your training's not clicking. You don't have the confidence. You don't have the motivation. You're not like excited to be doing what you're doing. And so, like for me, the most important thing is just to try and just reconnect with like the basic joys in life. And Harmony, my wife, is so good with this stuff. And she went through her adversity last year and she learned a lot, which she's sort of been trying to pass on to me. And I've been a bit reluctant to
Mm,
sort of race until recently. And so we've been joking that she's like my joy coach that, is reminding me of all the joyous, fortuitous things we have in our lives. But the thing that I think is interesting is that she's never been happier in our relationship. Like since we've known each other,
hmm.
she's never been happier. In the same environment of complete uncertainty, she's starting her own business, whatever. Like she's totally in her element, and me, I'd like feel so discombobulated.
Mm.
So it's everybody's different, and I think it's part of growing up to learn how you why you feel the way you do in certain circumstances, but then to reconnect with the deeper, more fundamental, you know, like joys in life. And so that's what I've really been trying to do in the last couple of months.
I just want to do a quick shout out too to Yassine Daboon, who's in the
Yeah.
chat room right now,
Yeah.
and Yassine is mentioning that he was one of the first people you texted when the actual break happened because you were near Portland, you were on mountains right near the city, and Yassine is a Portland resident and kind of the go-to trail guru there, and I can only imagine having that sort of moment of realization that this is going to be. I mean, when I've had my injuries, it's overwhelming in that immediate moment of I'm fucked. Like my schedule is fucked, my calendar,
Yeah.
everything is messed up now. And to have someone like him who he's one of the not kindest people on the planet too. He was telling basically he's saying in the chat room that his heart sank. His heart sank when
Yeah.
he read that because he knew what it meant for you. I also, because we're going to the live chat room here, Kim has pulled a number of questions aside. Let's get to some of these before I start digging in a little bit deeper because I've still tons of questions for Dylan.
Yeah, sure. Question from Deb in the chat room. Deb says, Dylan, as you're telling your story, I wonder if demands from your sponsors don't take into account recovery needs from racing and personal life. Has that been an issue?
Luckily, it's never been an issue for me. And I find that to be really incredible and something that I'm very grateful for. In fact, I was talking about it with Rob Carr just a few days ago about how the North Face has never once, asked me to do a specific event or told me I need to race X
Mm,
number of races. Same goes for Red Bull. And that's never been a source of pressure for me. It's more of a personal pressure that I put on myself. But I think one of the major things that made me pretty stressed at the end of last year was that all my contracts were up too as an
Oh
athlete.
yeah.
And like just negotiating and, doing that stuff is something that doesn't come naturally to me. And it's something that, I think you have to take seriously if you're trying to be an athlete at a professional level. And that caused me a lot of internal consternation as well, but for no reason at all.
Right.
One of the things I want to sort of communicate is that like this is all sort of like self-created, like I was never feeling as if I was in danger of being dropped by the North Face or Red Bull or any of my other sponsors. And in fact, I had new sponsors approaching me and asking, to come aboard, and everything turned out great, but it was still just like something that did stress me out a lot, but it wasn't sponsor created stress. It was personal, personally created stress.
Got it. Let's get to one more live question.
Yeah, we're talking about uncertainty and stuff like that right now. Kim Wrinkle in the chat room asked, Dylan, how does the uncertainty about Hardrock happening or not affect your mental and physical preparation?
Good question, Kim Wrinkle. Kim, can you tell us in the chat room?
Yeah, is it currently snowing?
Is it currently snowing? Dylan, that question I think is right up your alley right now.
No, it's a perfect question. It's like story of my life. Damn it. Like, tell me what's going on, like I just need to know. So I need to know what I can do to get there, and no, it's still a big question mark. We got an email from Dale Garland, the race director, today that was basically still ambiguous, saying that they were going to make the call, I think around this time next week. So hopefully we'll have some more visibility, or at least some definitive answer around that time. But here in Colorado, it's incredibly snowy. Just looking out my window, I can see up to 13,000 feet, and it's still incredibly deep. And I think they're, going to do the best that they can. Of course, it's a race I wanted to do since I got into the sport. So it's another thing where it's just like, God, I got in finally. But, now this is the year that the race is going to be run. And so, yeah, it's another thing. It's just another one of those things that feels to me like, it's just like one thing after another, where I just like need one domino to fall, and then like life will start happening again. And that's basically one of the most important, I think, question marks in my life right now, because that's sort of what I want to devote my energy towards. But if it doesn't happen, then you have to reevaluate and move forward and hope you have another chance in the future.
It's been really interesting to sort of watch both Hardrock and the Western States snow scenarios play out. I believe Western States is still moving forward 100% on the regular route. I don't think they've made any sort of announcements one way or the other. Snowpack is going to be an issue. It's going to be a snowy year for sure. But Hardrock is in a completely different place where the snow, it's record levels, right?
Yeah. So they just published their most recent measurement, I think 2 days ago on the 1st, and it was at 492% of the seasonal median. So it's roughly 500% over average. And in addition to the snowpack, we had an incredible avalanche season this year, where slides that hadn't gone in decades slid this year, meaning there's deadfall and destruction in the backcountry like we haven't seen in a long time because of all that avalanche activity. So in addition to the snowpack, the course could just be a complete disaster with slides and debris and deadfall. So I'm not really sure what other challenges they're dealing with, but it's not just the snowpack.
Yeah, it's been interesting to just even follow some video and photographic evidence that they've been collecting over the last couple of weeks, like Howie Stern Photo, who we've had on the show before, who's run Hardrock a number of times, and Kim Wrinkle, who's kind of our source in Silverton. It's been fascinating to see just how different it is this year. Cars driving through 35, 40-foot snow drifts. The roads are being plowed, but they're not really safe to travel in some places. And yeah, it's been really, really fascinating to follow. I want to kind of go back to how you were talking about that unsettled feeling and that lack of knowledge of exactly how things are going to play out, and especially right now, distilling it down with this injury and things like that. As the perpetuator of Stoke, as someone who is kind of known as, I love the term. I'm going to use it as many times as possible tonight.
You're doing great.
I don't know if it's self-coined or if Coach Coop or someone created it, or if the Marin boys created it. It's brilliant. But as this person who I look up to as this type of person, the one who kind of exudes excitement about the sport and everything about it, did you feel the pressure to maintain that? Did you feel it was difficult to have that sort of high level of excitement about a sport that you were unable to participate in to a certain degree? How did that sort of play out for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's good days and there's bad days, right? And I've never been one to like be super open with my emotions, as my wife would tell you. But yeah, I mean, I think I generally am a positive person. I think I've always been good at maintaining a steady, even realistic expectation, and therefore have always sort of like felt relatively content in my life, and pairing that with living a life of privilege and generally having very little adversity in my life, things have gone really well. And this has been really the hardest 9 or 10 months ever for me. And, the thing is, like, the injury only happened 2 months ago, right? And so the 7 months before that were just still like complete hell for me. And that, I think, so when the injury happened, like, I almost had a sense of relief to a degree. Like, like, now I just have to like not worry about being an athlete for a little while, and like try and get myself back in order, and get things under control, because it's just like I had been sort of treading water, it felt like, forever.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, like, I've shared a bit on social media, but like not like that doesn't, again, that's not something that comes naturally to me. And I think I've been as open as I want to be or can be without, and I don't want to over dramatize my situation either. It's a feeling of unsettledness. It's not like I'm dealing with any serious existential crisis in my life, but yeah, it's been hard. It's been really hard. And, I think the injury is a reflection of that internal experience, right?
Sure, yeah.
I don't think it's an accident that happened at the moment when I was like so flustered, I really do think that things like that happen in moments when you need them to happen. And so that's sort of how I've approached it now, is to finally use this as the damn circumstance in which I can, step back and focus on the fundamentals, and then come back and be my full, true happy self that I've always been. So yeah, I've shared a bit on social media, and I think, some people have responded well to it. But the situation is not as complicated as, it may seem. It's just been, one of those tough moments that we all face in life. And, I've just been in my little moment here. So it's all good, though.
And remind me how old you are. It's 18, right? 19?
I'm 33 years old.
You don't look a day over 21. I'm serious. I mean, it's even just hear you, obviously we don't have to get into specifics, but even just hearing kind of what you were talking about going through, I'm sitting here nodding my head going, yeah, we went through that phase when we moved from Los Angeles to Seattle of, we knew where we wanted to be. We knew what we wanted to do, but there's still this, just sort of that weight of life kind of sitting on your shoulders of, is this the right decision, or is this the path that I need to follow? And
yeah, the whole time frame leading up to our actual move was just like what are we doing?
Yeah, like just completely doubting yourself and doubting the
Yeah.
decisions you're making. And this is a commitment to a certain life that should we be making it? I mean, I was leaving an acting career behind and all these other dreams that I had had years before. And it was a real transition phase for both of us.
Mhm.
And you couldn't really put a pinpoint on exactly what the feelings were, but it was just that sort of unease. And I mean, now we're just partying every night, celebrating life, eating all the pasta. But I'm just nodding my head, man. So I also feel like live viewers and people who will listen to this as podcasts and stuff will also be nodding their heads, going, "I've been through phases like that. It might last a week, it might last 10 months, it might last 10 years." I mean, there's periods of life where not all questions can be answered, right? And
Yeah.
sort of that life giving you choices and you sort of exploring what's available. I do want to talk about the injury now. So this, you talked about it coming down the mountain outside of Portland, to which, by the way, Yassine in the chat room says, "I would never have gone down the way that Dylan did." But jokingly, from that point to now, what was the original outlook? So you get off the mountain, you get a diagnosis. You probably are going to all the doctors and everything. What was the diagnosis, and what did you expect to happen over the course of this year with this new injury?
Sure. So it happened on Mount Defiance in the Columbia River Gorge, just outside of Portland, near Hood River, Oregon. And I was basically a mile and a half from being done with my first like big trail run in months, because again, we've been snowed in here all winter. And I just rolled my ankle in a really gross way and heard and felt a really distinct popping sensation in my left ankle. And initially it didn't really hurt, so I sort of like, for a couple of minutes at least, sort of entertained the idea that, oh, it's not that bad. And then 5 minutes later, I'm wearing compression socks and my ankle is already like the size of a grapefruit. And I had my poles with me, but I had broken one of them in half earlier in the run, so I had one pole and I was just pathetically dragging my ass out of the off the trail with one pole, and just like so upset. I called my wife, obviously, and she encouraged me to go to the hospital in Hood River, which is what I did, which was only maybe 10 or 15 minutes from where my car was parked. I showed up there it's a small town hospital. So within 5 minutes, I'm on the x-ray table, and 20 minutes later, they come in and say, you have an avulsion fracture of your left ankle, which effectively means that the ligament, the ATFL ligament, which attaches from your ankle joint to the fibula, pulled so hard on the fibula during the ankle roll that it actually cracked and broke or fractured the bottom of the fibula. It was not that serious of an avulsion fracture. In fact, Hillary Allen, a North Face teammate of mine, also broke her fibula, but it was much, much worse, where it broke off like maybe an inch or two of the bottom of her fibula. Mine was just a simple avulsion fracture, so they treat it effectively as just a very severe sprain.
Okay.
And because that ligament broke the bone, and I never got an MRI to confirm this, but because that happened, it would seem to indicate that ligament is actually still intact because it had the strength to break the bone, right? So in that case, it's actually potentially a better outlook in terms of recovery time, because ligaments and soft tissue injuries can take longer to heal than bone.
Right.
So while it felt super catastrophic in the moment, it actually was maybe the best case scenario, if you can say such a thing.
Right.
And basically the doctors, I saw multiple people who told me, 2 or 3 months before you can really start to push yourself again. And I've been able to sort of abbreviate that a little bit and be a little bit more aggressive with my recovery, which I feel very fortunate about. But yeah, that was the story behind the injury, and I can tell you a little bit more about like the acute recovery of it if you want. But yeah, that's how it happened, and now I'm 8 weeks in now.
Definitely want to get to the recovery because I think that will help a lot of people sort of see light at the end of the tunnel. I know that in my experiences with ankle rolls, especially the bad one that I had, it was like the doctor literally said, "You're going to wish that you broke it." Like it's one of those things where
you'd be better off
you're
if you
better
broke
off
it.
if you broke it because the healing is a very definitive period of time, whereas really bad sort of sprains can be all over the board. So I assume you were probably relieved to hear that it was the best case, worst case scenario. We'll talk about how you sort of dialed in recovery and what direction you took. But of course, we do have live questions from our live chat room. What do we got?
Yeah, those actually the questions are kind of directed in
Perfect.
that direction. First one comes from Yassine. Yassine says, "What has helped expedite the healing process besides sitting in not spring soaking tubs with me?" He says, "Seriously, any supplements, specialized treatment, vegetarian diet, etc." And dovetailing on that, Marianne said, "Can you tell us a little bit about the specialized treatments at Red Bull that you were going down
Oh,
for?"
yeah. So a lot of really good stuff to touch on that I think will be helpful for people who may encounter this same situation in the future, but I hope they won't. I think first and foremost, it's really important with ankle injuries to immobilize them for the first 10 or 14 days. And that was something I didn't do on my right ankle. And to this day, my right ankle still feels kind of unstable from that major injury. And I think when that happened 5 years ago, sort of the main school of thought said, "Oh no, you need to introduce movement back into your ankle as quickly as possible, get the range of motion back." That I don't think is a good move. And actually, Jason Koop, my coach, recently wrote an article on the CTS website about the new school of thought. Instead of instead of rest, ice, compression, elevation, there's a new acronym. The first of which is like to immobilize your foot, which is they call it protecting. So I was in a walking boot. I was on crutches for 10 days. I was then in a walking boot for another 5 or 6, but it was immobilized for at least 2 weeks. And I think that is really, really critical to keep everything immobilized during that acute phase of healing. But one of the listeners mentioned was the treatments I received at Red Bull, which I think was just so critical. So I had planned a trip down to the Red Bull High Performance Center to sort of address my issues going on, and specifically like the fact that I had gotten sick in Hong Kong and Cape Town the year before, and try and figure out what was going on with my immune system while traveling. And it happened that this ankle injury occurred about a week before I was supposed to go. So I still made the trip, and the trip then turned into like, let's heal Dylan's foot rather than fix these other things, although we did address those too. And specifically, I saw a guy there named Marco, who is a body worker and an incredible, like, miracle worker of a body worker. And effectively what he did was just push all the swelling out of my foot just with really intense massage, basically. And so you can see I posted pictures of this, which you can still find in my Instagram stories, but of my foot like before and after a session with him, and it looked night and day better. And so for 3 days, every day he would work the swelling out of my foot. We'd do a few balancing exercises. He would, torture me by just releasing everything in my calf muscle, things like that. And then, as Yassine said, we did a little contrast bathing in Portland, which was great for blood flow and stuff. And then, while I've been here at home, and well, really since the injury, I've started using CBD cream quite a bit, and it fortuitously sort of happened at the same time that my wife was starting her own CBD topical brand. And so we've been joking about how it was like the perfect testimonial for Harmony to have as she's trying to start her own business, and how it's she's viewing it as a positive thing in that respect, which is hard for me to see. But I'm a true believer in CBD as a good natural anti-inflammatory. So one of the other things I've been doing is avoiding all Advils and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medication. I've been doing topical CBD multiple times a day, every day, doing the same self-massage that Marco did for me when I was at Red Bull. And that's sort of been the key to my, I think, quick return to health is, really releasing my lower legs everywhere I can, working on the dorsiflexion in my ankle, and a lot of self massage with CBD, and gradually just building strength back in.
And this all started to take place essentially, you said 10 to 14 days after. I mean, did someone recommend that complete immobilization? Was it, or was that something that you were like, I'm going to do this time because the last time I didn't do it?
Yes. And that was another very fortunate thing that happened to me is after I left the hospital in Hood River, we drove directly to a longtime family friend of Harmony's who lives just down the road from her parents, who's a podiatrist. So I went from the hospital to this professional podiatrist's house, who gave me the boot and said, everything you learned about introducing range of motion back in as quickly as you can is bad, because you want to make sure everything heals in a shortened position so that when you reintroduce the movement again, things are moving from a shortened position instead of being just chronically tight or chronically loose. I'm sorry. So, if you introduce that motion into a joint that's already super loose, it's not going to get that stability back. So letting things heal in a shortened position during the most acute phase, we're talking 10 to 14 days, letting it heal in a shortened position and then reintroducing the movement and trying to stretch things out a little bit, I think is the way to go, at least as somebody who's experienced it in both feet now, and treating one of them in the first with the first strategy and the second with the other. The second is definitely better.
I mean, it makes sense. Like logically in my head, I'm like, yeah, that totally makes sense. When you think about how often people say when you get an ankle sprain, you're more likely to get another one. You're more likely to be susceptible to ankle sprains in the future with that same ankle because the tendons have been stretched or, that sort of thing. I'm like, it makes perfect sense to, in that acute phase, in that beginning phase, keep it so it can't stretch out, so those tendons don't stretch out, and it keeps it nice and short. It makes perfect sense. Yeah. Let's get to one or two more live questions, and then we'll move into the post show with Dylan Bowman.
A Tiger Claw related question in the chat room.
Nice. I promise we talk a little bit about it.
ATB2 in the chat room says, question for Dylan. Thank you for providing some fantastic live streaming from Tiger Claw. If and when you run it, what do you think your loop order will be and why?
Oh, damn. Very specific. Very specific.
Or do you know the loops?
Yeah.
Maybe you don't know the loops.
Yeah, I do know the loops. Okay. And I thought a lot about this because I was strategizing with people when I was there. And first of all, what a sweet race that was, guys. You guys crushed it. And
Thanks,
it was
man.
so cool to be there.
Your presence really did make a difference. Like, you made a lot of people happy.
People were flipping out.
People were flipping out like, wait, why is Dylan? Whoa, Dylan. Like, it just was freaking people out.
As a sad injured runner, it was great to be part of the scene and see it firsthand. And yeah, what a cool, unique format. But I think I would do it in the way that I think David Laney did it, who won I can't remember the colors, but I would do the long gradual one first, which I think was the pink loop. And then I would do the
yellow
loop.
Yeah. And then you're on trial here, man. You got to get this right. Yellow. Yeah, I think you did yellow, pink, and white. Yeah.
So I would do the long gradual one, then the shortest, steepest one, and then the sort of
middle of the road.
The middle of the road, in that order if I did it. And I am tempted. It was such a cool event and such a great scene. And yeah, it was a beautiful day too. It was
We
amazing.
could not have gotten any better
we got
weather.
so lucky.
We got very lucky. Well, of course, you're always invited back to run the race, Dylan. It would be, an honor to see you run that course. And we have some ideas for next year. It's gonna be pretty great. And the whole goal of it is to be a race that people who have big summer plans or big spring plans, like big races and big energetic expenditures, they can come and run Tiger Claw, and it doesn't completely destroy them for longer than like a couple days, so people can come in, throw it mid-season, that sort of thing. So we look forward to having you whenever it works out.
It's like it's the perfect timing and the perfect distance to have a really hard, challenging day that'll sort of launch you into fitness, rather than be something that totally destroys you that you need a month to recover from. So
100%.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
And we have ideas for the latter of those two things. We have some ideas, but we'll talk about that on another show. Let's get to one more last question.
Let's see here. Question from Deb in the chat room. Deb says, Dylan, do you have any additional FKT routes on your bucket list?
I have too many to count, really. One of the things I'm thinking about potentially doing is maybe the Wonderland Trail FKT, which I know you guys are very familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
If Hardrock is canceled. But of course, we're getting ahead of ourselves there. But that's definitely a route that I'd really love to do and do hard and fast. I'd really love to do the John Muir Trail here or in California, near Yosemite. Although a runner who most have heard of named Francois Dane absolutely destroyed that record a couple of years ago in a way that makes me skeptical as to whether or not it's possible to achieve something better. But I'd love to do the John Muir Trail too. Yeah, that's just a couple to name off the top of my head. But like, I'd love to do the Timberline Trail around Mount Hood again. I did that a couple years ago. I'd even love to do the super long trail someday, like the Pacific Crest Trail or Continental Divide or things like that.
Well, of course, we can't wait to follow along, man. You're just such a joy to have in the sport and to have as someone that people can look up to and have guidance from. I am excited to see what happens next because I know you're running again, and that's what's kind of the coolest part about all of this is, despite the last 7, 8, 9 months, you had one of your best years last year. Seeing you run again and seeing you log miles and talk about how excited that is for you, what does it truly feel like? Being back 8 weeks, do you feel as strong as you were before? Are you just inching back? Do you have big plans ahead?
I definitely don't feel like myself yet, but I do feel very grateful for my body's willingness to tolerate what I'm throwing at it right now. Of course, I'm being much more aggressive than I would otherwise be, given the fact that Hardrock is now 7 weeks away and it's a race I wanted to do for 10 years. So if that weren't the case, I'd be taking it much slower and much more conservatively in my return to training. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend the extreme ramp up that I've done. But yeah, I think with a little bit more consistency, a few more weeks of solid training, and addressing this other stuff, and truly just like becoming more content and just comfortable with my everyday life experience, then the training's going to start clicking again. And so that's really my focus, is to get the old Debo back, and I'm sure it'll happen eventually. Not there quite yet, but I'm going to keep chipping away.
If there's one thing that we've been talking a lot about on the show recently, for the last couple of weeks, and I'm even talking to myself about it in the last 72 hours, it's allowing ourselves a little bit of grace, and having that life run balance is incredibly important in our lives when running is such a big part of it, big percentage of our day-to-day and our identity, and allowing ourselves just a little bit of grace to to not worry about running be such a huge part of it, and being able to balance that life and run relationship. So Dylan, I mean, all the credit to you, man. You're doing everything you need to do, and you're an inspiration to many people. I know it's a cliche statement, but it's true. A lot of our live viewers just really, really value you and what you do for the sport, as do I, as does Kim.
Mm-hmm.
So we appreciate you taking the time and joining us tonight, my friend. Very much so.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Before we move into the after show with our one and only Dylan Bowman, I would like Dylan to let you know where they can find you. Where can they find you on social media? Where can they follow up with residual questions and follow the adventures of Debo this summer and the dogs?
Yeah. Most importantly, the dogs, where you can find it Millie of the Valley on Instagram. And then, I'm at Dylan Bow, my first name, and then B-O, on both Instagram and Twitter, where I'm pretty active. And then, on Strava too, you can sort of see how the last several months have gone for me, including these last few weeks as I've gotten back into consistent run training. And again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the quick progression there, but I post everything on Strava too.
Sweet. Another big thank you to our wonderful guest, Dylan Bowman, for joining us on Ginger Runner Live 261 tonight. We are going to move into our post show. If you'd like to join us for our after show, it is quite easy to do. All you got to do is go to patreon.com/thegingerrunner for as little as $1. You get to access all of our after shows, whether they happen live in real time. So tonight, you'll get to join us tonight. Or you can go back and watch every after show that we have done. It's for as little as $1 a month. It's pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. Really great perk, and it helps support everything that we do here on the channel. Before we finish off the show, though, we have a new segment that we've been doing this year called our Crew Member of the Week. We like to recognize members of our viewing audience for doing just awesome, kick-ass things, breaking through barriers, walls, challenging themselves, whether it's a success or a failure. We just like to shout them out because it's all really special and helps inspire us. So without further ado, our GR Crew Member of the Week. Kim, who do we have?
This week, our GR Crew Member of the Week is Phil LaCroix, and Phil finished his first 100-miler yesterday. And Phil said, "What a crazy time. Just under 36 hours, 103 miles with 18,000 feet of climbing." And Phil goes on to say that he was beyond happy to see my wife and daughter at the finish line. A total surprise. And if you guys are in the GR Crew, there's a really cute video on the Patreon Facebook page of Phil running the finish line with his daughter, I believe. It was really cute.
Those types of finish line videos get me every time. Yeah. Especially like the 100-milers where they push themselves to their absolute limit and they run across the line with their kids. It's like, come on, waterworks. So big shout out again to our guest tonight, Dylan Bowman, and to everyone supporting us on Patreon. We'll see you guys in just a couple of seconds for our after show. Get out there, train hard, race harder, and part of the hardest. I know I am. We'll see you guys next week for another Ginger Runner Live. Am I forgetting anything?
I don't think so.
Great. We'll
see you guys. Am I forgetting anything?
I don't think so.
Cool.
Go watch the most recent Bandera Mountain video I just posted to the channel. Otherwise, that's it. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Bye.